Editing MIDI is closely tied to our quantize settings, so in this tutorial we're going to take a close look at both and how they work together, as well as some of the options we have for editing our MIDI notes. Now we've talked about the quantize section up above here, and we know that it ties in with our main quantize panel, which we can access by clicking here. So as we change our quantize value in either one, the other will reflect those changes, as well as our ruler and our arrange view grid. These will update to show the current subdivisions that we have selected for the quantize value. Say 30-second notes, we can see that everything follows together. So I'm actually going to go ahead and close out this main panel here. And in this tutorial, we're going to focus on editing MIDI and how our quantize setting affects this process. So I'm actually going to, let's double click on this MIDI part and open up our MIDI editor. And we also have a similar quantize panel here that we have up above, and these two will follow along with each other. So if I change this to 16th notes, then we can see our editor updates, but also our panel up above. And also, most importantly for this tutorial, our quantize settings will affect the behavior of most any tool that we may be using in the editor. Beginning with the most basics of tasks, such as adding notes, we are currently set to 16th here. So if I double click with the arrow tool selected, we are going to add 16th notes. We can double click to take those out. You can see that if I were to change this to quarter notes, we then add by quarter notes. And I'm actually going to take that audition off, so we won't be auditioning when we're covering this section. Now, if we were to add with the paint tool, we can use this as well just by clicking once. And we can see that that goes in at the quarter note setting. I'll change to 16th notes, and clicking once, we add those by 16th notes. If we hover over any notes that are there, the paint tool changes to an eraser, and we can just take those out. But also know that if we click, hold, and drag, we can input the note at the length that we would like. And this applies to the arrow tool as well. So if I double click and then hold on that second click, I can then adjust the length as I'd like. I'll double click to take that out. Now, one cool feature that I'd like to mention for adding notes that we have available to us is if I select the paint tool here and then hold down Alt, we get a little horizontal line there. And in this way, as I continue to hold Alt, I'll click and drag, and we can add in multiple notes based on the current quantize value. So I'll delete those out. Let's change the value to 30 seconds. I'll hold Alt. We have our horizontal line. I'll click, hold, and drag. And we can see we add 30-second notes. And we can even come up and add these on different notes. Now I'm going to select the arrow tool, and just to show you that we can resize any notes that are within our editor just by click, hold, and drag. And as we've seen, this is affected by our snap value. Currently we're set to 30 seconds. If I were to change this to 8th notes, then you'll notice that we snap to our 8th note subdivision. If we'd prefer not to have that snap function on, we can simply disengage snap by clicking here or pressing in on our QWERTY keyboard. And then if I come to either end here of our MIDI notes, we can make adjustments freely. Next, let's take a look at our split tool. We can access that by clicking here. And with this, we can split any note or group of notes at a time. So we have these crosshairs. Now the vertical, let me turn the snap back on here just to show that this is going to be affected, as we've seen with the other tools, by our snap value. So the vertical line is going to be where the actual cut will take place, and we want to place the horizontal line beneath the note that we'd like to cut. So if I go ahead and place those there and click, we can see we now have two separate notes. I'll Control Z, and then I'm going to select a group of notes here, select our split tool, and then place this at the bottom, our horizontal crosshair, and then we're going to cut each note there. Within that group, I'll Control Z, And we have another useful tool, split at grid, that can be useful for creating hi-hats for hip hop. Or if we select a note here, we can right click on that note, and then at the bottom we have musical functions, and then we can choose to split at grid, and we can see that this note is then divided to our eighth note subdivisions. I'll Control Z to take that back as it was. And we've seen that we can resize any of our notes as well as cut those notes using the split tool. We can also move these about anywhere we'd like horizontally. And again, this is taking our snap into consideration as we move that. And any note that we have selected, we can move up and down vertically with the up and down arrow keys. If we would like to move notes by octave, we can select this group of notes here. I'll hold down Shift and use the arrow key and then move these up by octave. If we'd like to quickly make a selection of a particular note within the editor, we can just use the left and right arrow keys. So I'll press the right arrow key, and then we can see we move along through each individual note. I'll press the left key. So we can see, once you get used to this, you can quickly come in, select a note, edit its pitch, move on to another note, change its pitch, use Shift to change that by octave, and so on. Now I'm going to select this note here. And if we actually hold Alt while we use the left and right arrow keys, we will nudge that note by the current quantize value, which is eighth notes. So if I change this to 16th, then we can see that that's being nudged by 16th notes. If I press in to take the snap off, then we can nudge this note in fine increments. You can see that moving along there. Now we also have a actions menu up top here. So if we click on the arrow there, we can access it, and there's a variety of different quantize functions that are available, such as quantize, quantize by 50%, freeze quantize, quantize in, humanize, and so on. So this is a menu that you will want to go through and take some time to become familiar with if you're going to be spending a lot of time working with editing MIDI. I'll go ahead and close that out. And at the bottom of our editor, we can access the velocity for our individual notes. And then as we hover over this velocity bar, we have a pointer finger there, and we can just click, hold, and drag to adjust the velocity of our notes. We can do that individually, or I could select a group of notes and then make that adjustment like so. We could also come to a note and hold Control and Alt at the same time. And then you can see that our arrow changes, and then we can click, hold, and drag in the center of that note and adjust its velocity in that way as well. Now up top we have this AQ, and this is auto quantize. So if I go ahead and select that, this works in such a way that if we have a group of notes selected and then we make a change to the quantize value here, currently we're on 16th notes. If I change that to say quarter, then you can see these automatically will quantize based on that new setting. If I do half a bar, we're not going to do too much of anything because the notes have already been quantized, but let me Control Z to take that back, and let's select bar. So we can see how that auto quantize works. I'll go ahead and take that back off, and let's change our setting back to 16th notes. And then finally, over to the left, we have an inspector for the editor. And we already saw the audition notes setting, and we can just toggle that on and off by clicking there. We have a default velocity for any notes that we may add. If I double click and add this note, we can see if I hover, we have this pop up. You can see the velocity is 80% because we have that set there. I'll double click to take that out. We then have a scale for our piano roll. And if I select this, you can see we have these blue squares that show up on our individual keys, and we can use this to restrict the placement of our notes to a particular scale. So if I were to change this from chromatic to melodic minor, we can see this key does not have a blue marker. So if I try to add a note there, it's going to position it down to the one below it. So let's change this again to minor pentatonic. I'll try to add a note here, and we can see that that's then placed below. So this is just a way to restrict the placement of your notes if you're trying to maintain your notes to a particular scale. Now at the bottom we can see more detailed information about any particular note that we select. We can see its start, where it starts, its end point, and its length. We can even, let me select this one here, we can even change its position by hovering our mouse over a field within the start area. So if I use my mouse, we can then change that by bar, we can change by beat, and so on. Now just below that we can see the pitch of our selected note. This is currently on E2. We can click this down arrow to change its pitch at any time there. And we can see its velocity, which we can also click to input a value. And then we can mute any selected note or group of notes by clicking on this box here. Okay, and so these are some of the ways that we can go about editing our MIDI within Studio One 4, as well as how that editing ties in with our quantized settings.